This week, Banksy announced that he would be raising money to support the 4 people accused of toppling the statue of slave trader Edward Colston in Bristol Harbour. This is the latest development in a culture war that has been going on since May last year. And last month, the statue of founding father Thomas Jefferson in New York City Hall was pulled down. Now, joining me in the studio to discuss this is architect Ike EJ, and also we're joined by the former Oxford student and original Rhodes Must Fall campaigner, Femi Nylander. Femi, thanks for joining us. I'm going to come to you first, if that's all right. With all of these statues that are coming down, or at least the discussions that are happening around the idea of statues coming down, a lot of people are nervous, not because of what the statues represent. I mean, we can all agree that slavery was a great evil, but rather that the decisions are being made in a non-democratic way. In other words, groups such as the Colston statue, groups are taking it on their own initiative to tear down the statue. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that and their actions?
Well, I think from my own perspective, I mean, I can talk about the Rhodes statue. That was the opposite was true, in a sense. The whole community said they wanted the statue to come down. There was huge protest. The MCR, which is the common room of the college, said that it wanted the statue to come down in a democratic election. The JCR said it wanted it to come down. The college agreed to take it down, and then they switched their mind because of a few private donors. And that was actually the original problem, that it was a few private donors who were threatening to pull £100 million in donations, which influenced the college's decisions. So a lot of the time, the people who are actually keeping the statues up or influencing the fact that these statues up, it's not a democratic process. It's large amounts of money from very strange people who just like statues of slaveholders.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, that your process was the democratic process, is what you're saying, and that the people basically threatening to withdraw money, that was the more undemocratic approach. But can I ask you about that? Because you just said that you think that these people just happen to like slave traders. But do you really believe that's true? Or do you think that they think the statue is a sort of a historical landmark that we need to preserve so that we remember the bad aspects of our history as well as the good?
Not particularly, because I think in Germany, no one was asking to keep up statues of Hitler in order to remind them. And people in Germany have a much better understanding of the history of the Holocaust than people in the UK have of the history of slavery, despite the fact that there's no road names still named after Hitler or after Goebbels or after other people, despite the fact that there's no statues of senior Nazi members around. They teach it in schools. Britain doesn't really teach its colonial history very much in schools, doesn't really teach its history of slavery much in schools. The only kind of learning I did in school about slavery was about the United States and the civil rights movement there, but expects people to suddenly absorb a knowledge of how bad this history was by keeping up statues of these men. It doesn't really make sense to me.
So, thanks for that response, Femi. I want to take that point and bring in Ike now. Hello, thank you for coming. What do you make of Femi's point? I mean, hasn't he got a point that actually these activist groups that are targeting the statue, as he mentioned, of Rhodes at Oriel College and Edward Colston, that this actually, in a sense, raises awareness of a history that we haven't really been taught very satisfactorily?
I'm not sure about the raise awareness issue. Look, we can all agree, as you said, slavery was an awful thing, and any country that perpetuated it, it's a stain on their history, ours, any other country that did as well. But I think the problem with this is, it's almost as if you're shouting at the past, you're arguing at the past. The past can't seek forgiveness. It can't atone for what it's done before. So basically, all you're doing is just kind of endless hamster wheel of nihilistic, pointless recrimination and resentment for which there can be no logical reprieve, because we can't put the past to a jury, as it were.
What about Femi's point about how we don't have statues of Adolf Hitler in Germany, and drawing an implicit connection between Hitler and Rhodes? And as an architect, I mean, you must be particularly aware of the landscape. And what do you make of that argument?
Well, I don't know if there ever were statues of Hitler in Germany. I may be wrong on that. I'm not sure if there were. Obviously, I wouldn't support that. But I think the difference with this is, essentially, as I said, said, I'm an architect. I believe in the idea of public space. Public space as a kind of concentration of citizenship, a place where community can come together and feel represented within that. Because of that, intrinsically within that, is underpinned by the idea of democracy. As you said, public spaces have to be a democratic representation of us. You can't have a mob or a minority imposing their view on what belongs to all of us. So essentially what I would say is, I know Femi mentioned about the MCR and certain people who were supporting the statue coming down. Essentially, that statue belongs to Oxford. Oxford belongs to its residents. Poll the whole city, consult all of them. If they agree it should come down, let it come down. If that's not the case, then it shouldn't.
Femi, can I take that point to you? Do you accept that if there are a specific instance of a certain statue and they poll the area, the local area, the residents, and they think that it should stay up on balance, would that be something that you would accept?
In Bristol, in Bristol, had wanted the Colston statue to come down. There'd been loads and loads and loads of things pushed for this, and it was just this recalcitrance and this idea that no, we can't do that, we don't want to do that. Especially in the case of Oxford, if there was an actual consultation with the city itself and the citizens of Oxford, I think that would be much preferable to a couple of very, very, very wealthy people holding this decision in their hand. And I would hope, to be honest, knowing what I know about most of the British public, knowing what I know about the people I know in the city of Oxford, that a lot of people, or at least a majority of people, don't really want to celebrate people who traded in trafficking human beings, and people who murdered many people who were colonialists and the rest, and would be happy to say, cool, let's teach this history, and then let's use that plinth, which is a celebration of someone, to celebrate someone that we agree aligns with our values.
Can I ask you about that, Femi? Because you mentioned the word celebration there. Do you accept that sometimes when there are statues erected of historical figures, it's not simply a celebration of the worst aspects of that person's life? It's actually more complicated than that. That it's more about the other things that they achieved. If we take the statue of Thomas Guy at Guy's Hospital, that isn't there to celebrate the fact that he set up the hospital with proceeds made from investment in the slave trade. That's there to celebrate the fact that he helped the poor and destitute of the area, and that actually it's a kind of misinterpretation of what the statue means.
But it's not fair to say. I mean, it's not just robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's me saying, cool, if I'm going to go out and steal and then distribute. I mean, you could say the kind of Robin Hood example. This isn't a Robin Hood example. This is someone making a lot of money off the slave trade, getting very wealthy off that, and then donating some of that money to local communities. It's not fair for me to go, if I go to another country, enslave people, denigrate them, force them to become my property, and then I take some of the proceeds from that and give that to another institution. That doesn't take away the crime, and it certainly means that the money that I gathered and was donated, I didn't make it fairly. It's not really my money. It's money that was stolen from the labour of the people I enslaved. They should
totally
put up a statue of the slaves instead of Thomas Guy, because they're the ones who funded the donation.
And again, but can I just come back on this? How far would you go with this? If you're willing to judge someone from the colonial era for having colonial values, which most people of the time would have had or would have shared, there are activists calling for the statue of Mahatma Gandhi to be removed, for instance, because of some of the comments that he made, some of the comments that would certainly be considered racist by our standards. How far would you want this to go? How many statues do you think should be removed?
So I think actually, it was in Ghana where they removed the statue of Gandhi, because Gandhi had some anti-black comments, and when he was working in South Africa, was known to be racist against blacks. And again, there's a line, and it's not. People often say the whole slippery slope argument, right? Which is that if we take down a statue of this guy or this guy, we're going to end up destroying all of these statues of Romans because they had an empire thousands of years ago, and this and that and the rest. And we can all use slippery slope arguments to not do anything. And no one is saying we need to go all the way down to remove any statue, and we shouldn't have any statues in the rest. There's some cases which are clear cut. This is not a very good person. It was not harming anyone to take this statue down. We can put it in a museum. It's making sure that people who are descendants of the victims can exist kind of in that space without worrying about it. But no one wants to go down the slippery slope of remove all statues to anyone who might have accidentally insulted someone back
Let me
3,000 years ago.
Let me bring Ike in on that point, because I mean, Femi just mentioned this idea of the importance of having awareness of ancestors, and I walk past Parliament and see the statue of Oliver Cromwell, who was probably responsible for the murder of many of my ancestors, and is that any different or?
Well, the thing is, what this does as well, which I'm a bit uncomfortable with, it kind of identifies slavery as a defining historic experience in all black people's existence. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to apologise for the fact slavery was awful, but it doesn't define my existence today. And I don't want people on my behalf changing our public space and our public realm on my behalf because they think it's going to hurt me. It doesn't hurt me. It's a part of history. I'm mature enough to realise that we have matured morally. These things we don't accept now, but we used to in the past. But we have to be more mature than just erase in history because we disagree with it.
And what about Femi's idea that that the slippery slope argument isn't something that we should really observe? Because is he right to say that that's not a thing?
Well, I'm not sure how I buy it, because what's the criteria? I mean, all right, fair enough. We say we're going to take down slave traders, but Femi mentioned, why don't we go back to the Roman Empire? Just because the Romans enslaved people thousands of years ago doesn't mean that they were any less evil than the people who did it in the 17th and 18th century. What's the difference? So as far as I'm concerned, the slippery slope argument is very valid, and if you're going to have a clear argument about what you take down and what you don't, I want to know what the criteria is that makes people decide that this person was worse than the other.
Femi, can I put that to you? Can I put Ike's question to you there? Who gets to decide where that red line is? I mean, you said there are clear-cut examples of, but I'm not sure there are, because with every example that we've had, look at Rhodes. There have been huge debates about his legacy in history. So who gets to decide where the line is drawn?
Well, again, just to respond to the point, the fact that there have been huge debates about his legacy in history is a result of the campaign to take the statue down. When the first campaign happened in 2015 in the UK, people were calling him a benefactor and a donor. And then back in 2020, when it kind of started again, people were calling him a colonialist. And the only reason we had the education about who he was because of this campaign. But at the same time, I think the fact is that people are not asking for the statues of the Romans to come down because the Romans enslaved people a long, long time ago. It's not that, and the descendants of the Roman slaves are not easily identifiable and are not still being in that way oppressed by Italy. If we look at the history of slavery in the UK now, the Windrush scandal, which is a scandal which pertains to people who are directly descended from British slaves, was a couple of years ago. And that's people in the Caribbean who have come here and who are still not welcomed by the supposed mother country. We can look at the statistics on race in the UK, which show that black men are 7 times more likely to be in prison than their population in the country. We can look at the stop and search rates and the fact that in some parts of the country they're 20 times more likely to be stopped and searched by police. All of these things. So there's a lot of things which show the Afro-Caribbeans in particular, and I am not Afro-Caribbean, and I don't think from his name that my other guest is as well, so I don't think it's fair for either of us to say, oh, well, I don't really feel slavery that hard, because I'm not sure. I mean, I may be wrong, okay, but I don't know. We're not the direct descendants of slaves.
Thank you.
Please correct
Thank you very
me
much. I'm going to have to go to Ike. I'm going to have to go to Ike now for a response to that because we're running out of time. Ike, do you have any response to that?
Well, basically, I'd say, again, my identity is irrelevant to this. It's a moral point. I don't think we should be saying because a certain person has this heritage, they have a right to have an opinion on this, and others don't. That's a really dangerous and divisive and segregationist way of looking at these things. And I don't think my heritage is relevant to the fact that, of course, I see slavery as something abhorrent, but again, I don't see punishing history when there's so many other issues we should be dealing with today, which would help people who maybe are underprivileged or are suffering, which could be done, but worrying about statues of men who died hundreds of years ago and using undemocratic means to impose your will on the majority is not the way I think we should be going now.
Well, this is a fascinating debate, and I'm sure it's going to carry on.